Sauerbrunn drives it in, the header, it's 3-0. Sauerbrunn delivers, Carly Lloyd finishes. Gunnarsson from Sweden. Right down to 7. Save, it's over! The Georgetown Hoyas have won their first ever national championship. Corona with a good switch there. Here's Zlatan now, be careful. Zlatan Ibrahimovic is a chip. Oh, it's spectacular. Are you kidding? The platform, the stage set today, and Ibrahimovic, off a planted foot, will chip this into the far side netting. That was worth the price of admission alone.
Well, he's had a resume that any announcer would obviously be envious of, as over the years he's partnered with Fox and ESPN to call men's and women's World Cups, the Olympics, national championships back here in the States, and of course, Major League Soccer, the majority of which he gets to call in his own backyard with the Houston Dynamo. On top of all that, a couple of weekly radio shows, which makes us even more appreciative that Glenn Davis somehow found time to chat with us. Glenn, great to see you. Hope you're doing well. Appreciate you setting aside some time.
Lincoln, as always, thank you. I appreciate everything you do for the sport of soccer, and I appreciate you having me on.
As you can see behind me, I have all my soccer broadcasting awards here in my background.
I had to dig deep for some of this stuff, but at some point you got to do something, right?
Throughout this fall, trying to check in with some colleagues like you, different experiences depending on sports and different levels on what this restart has been like. For soccer, maybe a little less of a learning curve as we'll dive into, but I think most people by now know before you were a broadcaster, you were actually a player, so you have a little bit different background than most of us play-by-play guys who by junior high knew we did not have a professional playing career. But if I recall correctly, you transitioned into broadcasting, doing indoor games at the Summit in Houston, calling hot shots. How did things progress from there? How did you ultimately slide over from color analyst to play-by-play?
Yeah, so it was a very different kind of experience and entree into the business for me, and one that I cherish a lot because it was a little bit different than the norm. Got an opportunity with an indoor team down here. The owner, Giorgio Berlanghi, came to me through one of his staff people, and would you be interested in being a color analyst? I said, well, I might as well give it a try, and why not? At the time, I was running a youth soccer club that was pretty successful. It took a lot of my time. But I broke in with Bill Land, who's now the current San Antonio Spurs play-by-play man and has had an incredible career, perfect guy for me to break into as an analyst. So, obviously it was a big learning curve. I learned on the job in the indoor game. I think everybody thinks just because you have a little bit of knowledge, it means you're going to easily transfer to being good on television, which you and I both know is not the truth. It does take additional work and preparation and things like that. So, I started as an analyst. I broke in knowing that in '96 MLS was going to start. So I was an analyst on the Dallas Burn. In fact, I was an analyst on maybe 3 or 4 teams in the same season because the TV packages were so mixed. Tampa, Kansas City, Dallas. I was doing games for all these different teams, and it was an incredible education, working with different play-by-play guys, different producers, Total Green at the time, getting better, I think, slightly each time. And then, I get a job at Fox Sports World, which is, they're taking in content from the Italian Serie A and all these leagues over the world, which ultimately would be Fox Sports and their soccer coverage. But that's where I kind of transitioned into play-by-play. Kevin Wall was there, another announcer we know from soccer. And Kevin was away for a weekend and just basically came up to me and said, you can do play-by-play. You need to do it this weekend. And I'm like, huh? And started with a Bundesliga game, believe it or not. And then the rest is history. And then I figured, the Alexi Lalas's of the world, the high-profile U.S. stars, these are the guys that are going to get the color jobs. And if I wanted career longevity, then the idea was to become a play-by-play guy. And then, you like to think that since you had a playing career at a good level, that maybe you have a few advantages when it comes to leading your partner into things and differing questions and all. And so that's really how it all started. But I was fortunate. I got a lot of help from a lot of great people, like everybody does, producers, a lot of encouragement, a lot of feedback. And, here you are. You had no idea. You didn't go to school for any of this stuff. And here you sit doing a couple World Cups and Olympics. And, whether you're doing a college game in Lubbock, as you mentioned, or you're doing an MLS game or Barcelona in front of 100,000 people, it's all the same. You go there enjoying whatever level it is, and really passionately calling the game. And, you're always very fortunate that you have the opportunity.
Well, clearly you're established as a play-by-play announcer. And over the years, you mentioned Alexi Lalas, you mentioned Julie Foudy, but you've worked with younger analysts, you've worked with analysts at all levels in their career. How do you, now that you're the play-by-play guy, because you're very generous with those younger analysts you're paired with, how do you make sure you, quote, stay in your lane and allow them to provide the same analysis that you're very much capable of at times?
Very, very good question, and one that I had trouble with in the beginning, quite frankly, because it was a little bit of a nebulous area, and then you have to distinguish between the roles. Now, I think every once in a while I can drop something in a little bit just based on the background, but the analyst always has the last word. It doesn't matter who it is; they get the last word. It's my job mainly to really set them up, but sometimes it allows me to have a good debate with them over some things, and again, they get the last word. But yeah, I've probably worked with close to 100 analysts during my career. I mean, it's amazing. I made a list once of the differing people. But I was a young commentator once, learning. So I'm always there to help the person you're with, because at the end of the day, I think you're judged on the pair, not the singular person. And you and I have worked in booths where, ego can take over. And people forget the end game is two people working as one and providing a great, interesting broadcast and supporting the players and the quality of play and the coaches on the field.
Yeah, I suspect both your time as a player and you even have a coaching license is the fact that as a play-by-play guy, you can still at least use that to help kind of predict what might happen in a moment and prepare your call for it. So my chats this fall with folks like you really want to focus on the element of the pandemic, how it's affected broadcasting and the restart. Soccer play-by-play announcers might be a little bit more prepared for what is becoming the new normal this fall, which is calling off monitors. But let me take a step back. Before the pandemic with the Houston Dynamo, what is your normal setup like? I assume it's the traditional model with the production crew on site, the truck there, sending your signal out.
Yeah, you mean as far as when we do away games?
First for home games and then away games,
yeah.
Remind us what it looks like.
Yeah, so home games, yeah, we have the full truck there and a crew and cameramen and the whole 9 yards. And then, when we do a road game, it's basically out of a facility at the stadium. I've done them over the years in different places, depending on what network we were on, because the Dynamo have been on a number of different networks. I mean, I've done everything from an amazing setup at like CSN, to where we had a boom and a tremendously beautiful set, to doing things that are put together and still looking good out of the stadium now. So that's where we do it, out of the stadium. When it's a road game, we take the road feed, as you know from doing games off monitors, that you're at the mercy of the road feed. So you probably expect a little bit more tighter shots of the opposing team. So it is a little bit different. You don't have as much control of your broadcast, but when you've done a lot of these games and you've done feeds from Italy and places like that, you always expect the unexpected. So you and I know that there's certain times you're going to get replays, and they're going to come after goals, they're going to come after brilliant plays. So you're pretty in tune with all that, but you also have to be kind of on your toes. Yeah, so that's how it works. It's old hat to me to do games off monitors. It's not difficult to me. It's not intimidating, but I could see how those who haven't done it, it does become different, because it's a very, very different environment, and you almost have to mentally place yourself in the stadium. Once you put that headset on and you get some natural sound, You got to just place yourself in that stadium and truly believe you're there.
Yeah, I find I ultimately do get lost in it the same way watching a good TV program or movie at home on your TV, even though you've got your whole living room surrounding you. You do get tied into a good sporting event off the monitors. Now, if we're really lucky, we're not just getting program, which is what folks at home see. We might be able to get a few other camera shots so that we can do our best to look around. But most of, I assume, what you're getting is the common thing of just primarily what the folks at home see. It helps us focus on what people at home see, which means we aren't wandering, so that keeps us honest. But at the same time, it is harder to see the bigger picture, which maybe doesn't affect the play-by-play guy quite as much as an analyst. What do you typically tell an analyst the first time they're working remotely with you?
Yeah, it's just you just said it basically. It's remember, they're seeing what you see. So yeah, whatever's on that screen is what they see. I don't know if you've ever been in situations where you've had to completely call the game off a monitor, or even though you're in a live stadium, but these things have happened. But yeah, it really is about just getting the experience. And it's no different than watching highlights. I don't think anybody really has a problem with it. I think it's tell us how and why things are happening, and you do that off a screen and the monitor as though you're watching highlights. It's really no different. The only difference is you don't have the natural sound, you don't have fans, you don't have all those other elements that make the game the beautiful game that it is when you're a commentator and you're actually on site with great crowds. So really there's not much else. I think it's stick to point, it's be simple, it's be clear, it's if you can say something in 3 sentences, do it in 3, not 7. Yeah. Bring out coaching points, which a lot of times for me, it's about clarity when you're bringing out a coaching point. It's not about ramble. It's about make that coaching point. Josie Altidore notices right arm as he gets it across the chest of a defender, uses it for leverage to turn, and then eventually get the shot off and score a fantastic goal. I mean, little nuances like that are the things that I'm looking for from an analyst.
When you are calling a match remotely, are you asking your director for anything in particular? I'll tend to remind my guy, please get me the hero shot, linger on it as long as possible, because if I'm at a stadium and a goal is scored quickly and there's a whole bunch of people gathered in the area, my eyes can follow that guy, even if the camera isn't, to make sure I'm identifying the right person if there wasn't some obvious trademark about him to pick up on. But if I'm doing it remotely, I'm going to need a little bit longer to focus to make sure I'm giving credit to the right guy.
Well, yeah, that's a great tip there from you. And I think the other thing is, you are at the mercy of their feed though sometimes. I mean, we don't have a camera in these stadiums on our own for the most part on our MLS broadcast. So we're basically, at the mercy of what we're seeing. And there isn't a lot that can be done to support you from that standpoint. I mean, you got a research assistant maybe and stats, but outside of that, it's really you two guys, and you're pretty naked. And I think soccer broadcasts are like that in general. You don't have spotters, you don't have this vast array of people supporting you and helping you. God knows how you call football games. I'll just say that right up front. I don't want that job. I would have no clue how to do that. But I would just say that, when it comes to calling soccer, and I know you know this, it really comes down to our own preparation, our talking to coaches, our watching tape and games prior, us talking to our analysts. That's really where the 90% of the meat comes from. You're not getting a lot of support from the background, except from all these great stats people that we work with and research people. But the game's flying by so fast, you got to know what you're talking about, and you got to be on top of it.
I will say soccer lends itself a little bit more to a remote call, as does any sport that follows the ball. It's when you get into the spring sports like baseball and softball where you also need to know what every base runner is doing at that time. And just because the ball's hit into left doesn't mean you can focus on the guy tracking down that ball. You have to know whether runners are moving around. But for the most part, as long as we keep it simple, and I remind my analysts, as you mentioned, just stick with what we can see. Don't speculate. Don't paint yourself into a corner. But just you should always be able to focus on what's ahead of you. So as much as that was life before the pandemic, obviously March MLS season was just ramping up for this year. When they do get the restart, it all took place in Orlando. So that meant folks like you who are working 1 or 2 matches a week were sitting back waiting for that to unfold. But what, if any, are the differences now that you've returned to the stadium to call Dynamo matches in terms of your setup than before, other than perhaps just the plexiglass between you and Eddie?
Yeah, plexiglass. I mean, everybody's wearing masks. It was certainly very strange when there were no fans in there, even though there's a limited amount now. There's acoustics, there's noise. You've got more of a feel. It really was kind of a sad, barren feeling walking in. I just remember it just being, just very strange, very surreal, very, very different. I think being careful with all the protocol and doing what people are asking is a big part of it as well. When we call a game, we do have plexiglass. We're on a desk, so our masks come off on a desk, and I think we're 6 feet apart. I'd have to take a tape measure. I'm not 100% sure, but the good news is the last time I got a test, I was negative, so I still feel pretty healthy, so I'm not worried about that. But now that there's people there, it's also interesting too, because we do an open down on an area behind the goal, and then you go walking back to your booth with the stage manager and your partner, and people want to talk, and you're kind of like, I just kind of want to get to the booth and do my job and stay focused on it. But you also don't want to be rude to anybody because they're excited to be back in the stadium as well. So maybe just a little bit of a wave, or how you doing, or a little quick interchange, but you keep moving, because really my mission getting down there is as close to normalcy as possible, but really you're down there to do a job. And, with people watching at home now, probably a few more eyeballs at home because they can't go to the stadium or elect not to go to the stadium. You want to do the best you can.
Yeah, obviously time sensitive getting back to the booth, but other than that, anybody who met you in person, I don't think they could appreciate exactly how accomplished you are in your career. You're a little too generous with time and hellos and interacting. Obviously, very charitable, especially with children's cancer pursuits. But I have a feeling most of those folks who don't get to chat with you right before the game, at some point, they'll have a chance to bump into you and chat music or soccer or anything else that you all have in common. You mentioned getting tested. Personally, for me, during the 6 months that sports were aside, kind of like you, pretty conservative with how often I was getting out of the house. And my first test, I think like you, was because of a broadcast with ESPN policies. They needed to show that if any time that they send a crew to be on site of the campus, for you, I know it was going to Lubbock for an ESPNU college game. For myself, it was for a college football game. But they do want to have every single person involved tested, especially because the analyst and the play-by-play guy in particular are particularly exposed, because there we are with our masks off, even if we are separated, sharing a booth together. But let me ask you about that trip to Lubbock. That was I assume your first time getting on a plane and traveling to a broadcast. How was that experience ramping up to otherwise what's routine for you? A quick turnaround for a college soccer match. How was that different? Getting things started that way?
It was definitely very interesting. COVID affected me pretty closely because my nephew got it amongst that first wave of people in Italy, and was back in New York in the really, really dark times in the very beginning. Not that they aren't as dark now, but at least we know a little bit more about it, I assume. I'm not trying to be an epidemiologist here, so let me just put that out. But this was a healthy, fit 33-year-old guy who could dunk a basketball. Incredible lung capacity, spear fisherman who could go down to depths, and he got nailed. And our family was really, really worried. He was having breathing problems. He has since recovered, thankfully. He still does have some after effects. He's had some accelerated heart rate issues and some breathing issues, but it seems as though things are moving towards a real good stabilization. So that's good. And then I lost 2 friends. My mind was occupied with a lot of things. And then when it went down, the last flight I had taken was visiting my brother on a vacation. So really, I was like you. I was very careful. I think in the beginning, I did more house cleaning than I have in my whole career, as far as wiping things down and everything. But yeah, it was a time of reflection. It was a time to reflect on, your career and what you enjoy doing, your purpose in life. I intended to make use of all the time I possibly could. I did not take another flight until the one you mentioned to Lubbock a couple weeks ago. It was on one of the smaller regional jets. Everybody was good with the protocol. It was okay. Now, if I was in the middle of the plane with people on either side, I don't know, it might have been a little bit different because I was lucky to grab that one seat against on the single side there. So,
yep.
So it was definitely different. It was definitely different. What I will say is people handling protocol, whether it's ESPN or MLS, Houston Dynamo, the differing entities that are out there, they really do seem to be on top of it, and you really got to tip your hat to people for that, because that's not easy to do. Whether you're coaching a team or you're bringing people into a stadium, tremendous amount of concentration and planning that has to go into that stuff. But I'll still wipe down my equipment myself, all those things. And then once I got there, no, it was great. It was just great to be around a college environment. I love the college game. I know what it means in this country. I know what it means on the women's side. And I think it's just a great environment to be around. So it was healthy. They had fans there. It was a good competitive game between your team, Baylor, who you call all their games, and those Red Raiders and Tom Stone. So it was a great time.
I will say, even during the stoppage in most sports, I think a lot of announcers were kind of envious of you and what you could do for your own mental health. You have your own 2 radio shows, both in Houston and in Austin. So you kind of still were in touch with people. You're having that kind of interaction. Did that help get you through that stretch?
I think it did help. It helped keep me occupied. It helped. I don't think it's healthy to sit around all day worrying about this. I mean, I think we all have to be concerned, but there's so many things going on that I think if you go 100% into it and all you do is listen to the news every day, I don't know how you can't be a little bit depressed with what we get every day. So I made a conscious effort to do things that were healthy, do things that were positive, working out, eating, obviously cooking at home more, which, I'm a pretty easy sucker to go to a restaurant, so I've been cooking at home. I don't go inside restaurants yet. I'm not ready to do that. I have met some friends, social distance a little bit, but nothing heavy, no groups. And I also feel like, I have a responsibility to everybody who's working on the broadcast too, not to get sick or bring something down there. And that can happen by accident to people, and I'm sure it has, but I do feel that responsibility. And, outside of that, the radio shows were very, very healthy. I was doing a ton of Zoom. One thing that came out of it for me was just Zoom interviews, and like we're doing right now, and, doing them with a number of people over in Europe, so when things went down in Barcelona with Messi and all, or stuff prior, or in England with Leeds, and, I could get a hold of people that I know on the ground over there to give it to us from there, which, to me is just absolute gold. You're talking to guys who are covering the team every day, or standing next to Bielsa every day talking to him. I mean, you can't beat that. You can't beat a guy who's at Barcelona's training sessions or in all the press conferences, right? So, from that standpoint, that was pretty cool. I was fortunate to have the setup at home, had it for a while. I haven't even been back to my studio since first week in March. That was the last time I actually did a radio show from the studio in Houston. And of course, the Austin show like that I have tonight, we just do out of here.
You were I wasn't planning on bringing this up, but you were talking about, eating more at home. Probably you've always been fairly disciplined, at least in my eyes. Whereas I will always welcome any free media provided food in the press box. So my body welcomed the break. And what I wasn't appreciating so much until you just mentioned it is not only was I eating a little bit better during that stretch, but I was getting out and just exercising more. And more often than not, what was playing in my ears were the archives of your radio shows. so that I could stay in touch with what's going on around the country and around the globe in soccer. So it's kind of Body by Glenn, where I was getting out for a walk, being able to listen to the archives of Soccer Matters, both your Houston as well as your Austin show.
Well, Lincoln, that's nice to think that I might have had something positive to do off these radio shows. So that's good. That's funny. I thought you were joking around when you said that. So
no, you are talking to a lot less. I dropped more than 20 pounds during that whole stretch of just having better habits of getting outside and enjoying some fresh air and having something to take my mind off the exercise by listening to you and some other podcasts.
Yeah, well, maybe it's time for a Soccer Matters fitness mirror. You and me can be the co-founders
right.
of it. I don't know. It's good. I think a lot of people focused on their health. Actually, I think I've seen two things. I've seen some people really focus on their health, and it's been a tremendous improvement for them as far as getting fitter, healthier, and I've seen it go the other way too. With some friends. So
I did my share of binge watching shows.
By the way, who will remain nameless?
I very much went one of two ways, and I may or may not have already gained some of that weight back now that we're a couple months back into the broadcasting routine. Still avoiding the press box buffets though. So with the restart, from what I've noticed, of course, you're typically the voice on Longhorn Network of the Texas Longhorn soccer program as well, there with Ange Kelly. But there's, from what I gather, going fairly conservative, keeping some of their full-time employees just in-house rather than asking you to travel to those games. But otherwise, looking ahead, do you see any other impacts on your schedule during the next year or so?
Yeah, I really don't know what to expect. I mean, what I know is right now I'll be doing MLS through the first week or so of November. Outside of that, I don't know. Every year I usually call the men's national championship and the College Cup semifinals and all that. Longhorns, like you said, Longhorn Network, like you said, which, over the years I feel really a part of Longhorn athletics and Angela Kelly's team. And, I've watched girls go through the cycle of 4 years, in the program. So, I think sometimes people forget that you get very attached to some of the teams that you work with and call, especially at the college level for me, because it's a little bit pure, I played the college game in this country too. And, I know what it felt like to play in front of your peers and your student body and all that. So I think you get a little bit more attached to the playing career, maybe of those players. At the pro level, I really try to maintain my distance. I don't want to be drinking beer with players on teams. Somehow that seems to be the new norm, but that's not one I'm going to, because these are the same people that you're going to have to provide some healthy criticism to. And if you're not doing that, then you're not doing your job. So, I don't know. I really don't know. I'm just kind of lying in wait here, finishing up a pretty condensed MLS schedule here in October. We're doing a lot of games on Wednesdays and Saturdays. We got a Wednesday game against Nashville here. That'll be in the stadium. They'll probably get about 1,000 people in there. Really that's kind of where it's at. And then just making sure good content goes out on the radio every week.
Over the years, have any of your broadcast colleagues asked you for advice with what's relevant now, and that is more and more calling off of monitors being off-site?
I've become friends, fortunately, in this business with a lot of great people, like I'm sure you have, and you share notes and you help each other if you're doing the same game or things like that. I've had a lot of guys, how do you do stuff off monitors? And I'm like, well, I mean, it's no different than when you're at a game and you're looking at a replay. The only thing is you can't look up and look at a stadium. That's all you got. So I've become friends with a lot of guys. One of those guys was Bill Brown, the old Astros announcer, who, he's just like, how do you do soccer? And I'm like, well, it's the same way that I look at you doing baseball or you, Lincoln, doing football. These are sports that, I don't have the knowledge. I think some people can fake things, but I would never want to do those sports because I don't know them. I don't understand them. And I don't feel that I would be comfortable doing any of that. And I'm not even sure I'd be able to make the transition, to be honest with you. It's different. But I love talking to these guys. Bill Worrell, I also seek out a lot of guys outside of soccer too. because it's a different sport and a different perspective. And I always look to see if there's anything you can take from those sports, or maybe their approach or the things that they do. So I've learned a lot from a lot of different guys, and great storytellers and great play-by-play men. I mean, you and I know inflection is a huge part of what we do when we call soccer games and a tempo build. So, yeah, a lot of give and take, a lot of sharing, not too much asking about the monitor, but a couple.
As established as you are, do you find yourself still tweaking how you prep for a match or how you lay out your notes? I know for football, people love to show off their beautiful charts of every position laid out. And I found for soccer that absolutely was not going to work for me. The soccer players, they don't behave. They don't stay in one spot out there on the pitch. So I needed to figure out something else. And actually that's influenced now how I do my charts for 14 different sports throughout the year, completely different format.
You're unbelievable that you can jump in, and I give you a lot of credit and a big pat on the back to be able to jump in.
It's because I'm equally unqualified for all of them.
Yeah, but that's not an easy thing to do. So yeah, you'd be like a very versatile guy on a team, which that's difficult. I mean, sometimes I'm flipping around and I see you on a football game and I'm like, oh yeah, there's Lincoln. Okay, and the other night I saw you doing Austin Bold or a college game. So your ability to jump in and handle it really has to be lauded.
But anything in particular that has been a recent adjustment in how you approach your prep?
I forgot to answer your question.
My mom says you have 5 more minutes to say nice things about me, but we have to get back to the topic afterwards. Yeah.
All right, Mom. I got more nice things to say about him, but I think I'll hold them in my back pocket. Listen, I think one thing for us, especially, as in my case, having seen the game a couple decades, you have to make sure you're moving forward with the game, just like coaches have to, right? The game is changing, the rules are changing, the way it's played is changing. It's not always about what happened in your day, and there are still a lot of good things from your day that apply to the game now, but there's an awful lot of changing things and differing tactics. And, just take social media coming into sports now. I mean, imagine sports without social media. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, the players have become in some ways a little more individualistic. It's more challenging for coaches to keep people on the same page and consistent. So as far as game calling, no, not too much difference. I think a little bit more storytelling on my part and trying to star build players. But I think that is always our challenge on a soccer match, is to make sure that the priority is what's happening in front of us and the nuances of the game and the tactics and all those things that are important. And, you don't want to be up here in this space just rambling on about stats and this and that. And then, oh, by the way, Arabo just hit one off the crossbar, and then you go back into your story. That to me is not soccer commentating. That's just rambling. And I don't like that. That's not my style. I still want the players. I want the way the game's played. I want the questions posed as to how and why people can change things in this game. How somebody, if somebody makes a tactical move, well then how does the opposing coach adjust to that? Those are the things that I think we have to continue to focus on as a public, because it can't just be about simply the story. Stories are a huge part of it, don't get me wrong, but we also have to, in the eyes of the public, have really good content and talk about the tactics and what goes through the minds of these players when they're playing against a team that's defending in a low block, or why is the game so open all of a sudden, these things. So I think that's important. And anybody who's an ex-player is an analyst, or, you're going to get drawn to that stuff anyway.
I think most of us spending so much time researching, trying to find those little stories, we're so excited to share them all, and we can get caught up and even overwhelm the viewer by forcing all of those stories at once. Certainly envious whenever you can follow one team, like for you, you regularly see the Dynamo, so you're going to have a season to sprinkle in one story after another, things can build. But you're right, the average fan, maybe a few stories here and there, but focusing on more on what's developing that match. I was just reminded that the first guy I asked for soccer advice is currently calling Major League Baseball and the NBA, go figure. But Brian Anderson, who former host with the Spurs, and then at the Golf Channel, was living in Central Texas before he got the job with the Brewers on TV, and then Turner, calling a variety of sports. But he was in the rotation with you and a couple others on that Big 12 championship over the years on that final Saturday each year, or Sunday rather. And he was the one who basically said, story time, you got to limit it to around midfield. But once you get obviously to either end, that's when it's time to get to business on what is actually really developing. But it's just funny who can help you with advice and little nuggets along the way. And perhaps it was helpful talking to Brian, since neither he nor I were a former player and had gone through the same ladder that you had. So perhaps I was able to relate to that a little bit more easily.
Well, I don't think, the whole former player thing, that doesn't mean people aren't very good at their crafts. I mean, I just have the ability to rely on some past experiences.
Sure.
That's all when it comes to the game. And my whole life's been spent in the game. So if somebody wants to have a conversation with me about player development, well, I ran a youth club for 13 years, so I can dig deep into experiences, how it is dealing with parents, how you build a program in a country that's got 3 other traditional sports, and all those kind of things. But I think Brian's right. You got to be careful when you put these stories in. There's going to be times when sometimes you just kind of slightly get caught. You got to get out of it and rejoin it. Goal kicks are a great time to get things in. Once you see it leaving somebody's foot at the 18 and it's 15 yards over the crossbar, you can get into a story about a player. And but you're right. You got to know when there's that one pass that is made and the tempo picks up. I want to be on that call the moment that happens. I don't want to pick it up 5 passes later when they're inside the 18, because then I don't feel like I've properly built it up, right? So, and it's not always perfect. I think when you're doing soccer games, just because it isn't that structured as baseball and you don't have time between pitches, or football where it's a play and then you can kind of recover and begin to talk about things. So it is different, but I learned from them all, believe me. Thank you, Brian.
Glenn, I certainly miss bumping into you. Look forward to the next time that we can safely do so and cross paths at a venue again. Happy, though, that I'm able to hear your call both for the live Dynamo matches as well as the radio show, as I'm still trying to get out of the house every now and then. But you were one of the first people I wanted to reach out to during all this, because I suspected the learning curve for someone like you would be a little bit less moving into what may be the new normal for the next year or so with remotes, because soccer has been doing this at the highest of levels of Major League Soccer for years. Whereas I suspect as I start talking to some colleagues in college football and Major League Baseball and some other sports, that is where the real kind of shock is probably just now starting to die down for some of those individuals who are in bubbles and calling, whether it be TV or radio, off monitors for the first time, more so. But certainly appreciate the opportunity to get to know you over the years, bump into you every now and then. And thank you very much for setting time aside. You want to remind everybody at home where they can find those radio shows?
Well, I don't have to shamelessly promote it, but I guess I will, since you just set me up here.
Not going to make you eat any hot wings. Yeah.
I just have 2 shows in Houston. On Tuesday nights at 7 o'clock, it streams at ESPN975.com. And then we have one on Mondays, which is tonight, 7 o'clock on hornfm.com, on the Horn in Austin, Texas. So thank you. I do miss seeing you too. I think we all miss the camaraderie at the stadium and the people that we see and all that good stadium food as well.
Glenn, appreciate you taking time.
Thank you, Lincoln. Much appreciated. Thanks for having me.